This is my combat system. According to Google, it should be able to entertain the player for hours, and this doesn't entertain anybody. So I did some research and found a few ways to improve combat in video games. One way is increasing the feedback of attacks, which I have done by adding an impact animation and ragdolls. But even if I push the feedback to the next level by adding sound effects, combat would feel boring after a while, because you do the same thing over and over again. That's where this becomes an important way to create entertaining combat, and in my case the variety came in form of different combat types. Until now I planned out the attacker, the defender, the archer, and the mage. But before I implemented them, I brought variety to the movement by adding rolling, or should I say bowling? Anyways, because you are able to prevent damage by observing the enemy and perform a roll at the right time, you get a feeling of control, which improved the combat way more than I thought. With rolling implemented, the base for combat was done, and we can dive deeper into the first combat type, the attacker. His main ability is the increased damage caused by his badass hammer, but badass hammers are heavy, so the movement speed is slightly decreased. Until now he has two different attacks, one heavy strike and one turn attack that applies knockback. Especially if you are surrounded, swinging that hammer feels really powerful, and in combination with the ragdolls, this type leads to interesting and funny mass destruction. The complete opposite of the attacker is the defender. He has an increased amount of life points, and his main ability is blocking attacks with a shield. But keep in mind that your movement speed is heavily reduced while the shield is equipped. Now if you time the block right here, when the enemy's weapon turns red, you push him back and receive no damage. Also he's stunned for a few seconds, which is enough to perform a simple attack. So in single player, the defender is great for defeating strong single enemies, but if you're playing the game in local multiplayer mode, he can be used to grab attention of enemies so your friend can kill them with, for example, his bow. This leads to the archer, which is currently my favorite and most polished combat type, even though development looked like this, or like this, and sometimes even like this. However, the main ability of the archer is ranged combat and fast movement. But when you are aiming, the movement speed decreases and you zoom in to get a better feeling of how strong the bow is loaded. Adding this feature actually taught me a really valuable lesson, which is that small changes can have a huge impact. I mean, look at this early state when the camera position switched instantly compared to the transition, which required just a few nodes and made the whole bow combat way more interesting. But killing enemies from a safe distance isn't the only way you can fight as a archer. So I think it's that combination of good feedback and variety that makes the archer type so entertaining. The mage has more or less the same abilities as the archer, ranged combat and fast movement, but still provides a completely different feeling when fighting. He remains fast and doesn't zoom in when aiming, which makes it hard to hit enemies from large distance and forces the player to encounter them in the arena. Now you have to focus on the enemy and predict his movement in order to kill him with ranged combat, and I guess you can clearly see why ranged combat as a mage feels more engaging, even though it doesn't feel as impactful as shooting the bow. So the mage can be used to fight a group of enemies with ranged combat instead of switching to the sword, but he isn't as useful for ranged combat from safe distance. To prevent confusion, I made this overview of all 4 combat types. They are a solid base for further improvement, provide a decent amount of variety, and according to my brother, made the combat way more entertaining. It has also been a large step forward to bring life into the special character system I want in my RPG, but more about this in a different video. So if you want to stay up to date, make sure to subscribe and activate the bell. But before you quit, I wish you the best for 2022 and see you next time.